That's actually quite fascinating. Well, what I also noticed, and this may ultimately be good for Salesforce insofar as I feel like to a certain extent over the last, I don't know, 5, 8 years, they've lost their mojo a little bit, right? They very much had this, we're a big giant startup kind of um, mentality that seemed to have given way over the last several years with all of the political infighting and the CEO, what do you call it? Whatever, with trying to find
Post
your
CEOs that
successor.
kept
Yeah,
disappearing.
all of
Brett
that,
Taylor
all of
being
that
the
sort of drama.
latest of them. Yeah.
And I noticed on the marketing stuff that they have, if you go back to the very beginning of Salesforce, remember it had the software with the no slash through it, and they were back to having the DIY with the no slash. And this may be the galvanizing thing that helps Salesforce sort of get that mojo back. I mean, we'll see. I think I guess my big challenge and concern is that, and even with the way you described that we're doing the demos, is that this stuff is nowhere near as simple as people want to make out, as tech companies want to put out there. And all you have to do is look at the automation anywheres of the world, the RPA vendors, to see that these sort of agent based models, while can be very powerful, they take a lot of effort and work. And in fact, and I'm not sure if this helps Salesforce and bidding up or not, but CIO, maybe not coincidentally, last week had an article about, in the title, I'll just read it. Think of building your own AI agents. Don't do it, advisors say. And it was referencing some data coming out of Forrester and some consultants who maybe have a vested interest in saying this is a mess, but basically talking about how for most organizations this is really challenging. So that could bode well for a Salesforce with that message of this is not DIY. But I think it also speaks to the fact that there's, in my opinion, almost as much risk in having this super simple sort of model with all this power underneath the covers. It's like putting a first time driver behind, the seat of a Ferrari
Hmm.
in crowded traffic. And I just, it's you're just setting yourself up. And so it was, I thought it was interesting to see these sort of all these positions sort of coalesce this week.
Yeah, with that CIO piece, I always have a little doubt about anything that says don't do it yourself and hire consultants to come in and do it instead. There's obviously a little bit of a financial interest there, but I do think there is something to the fact that people have to think about the technical debt that might happen if you suddenly dump 5,000 agents all at once, many of which might be duplicative in some way, and many of which may have different types of logic based on the individual builder. Uh, that is going to be a lot to keep track of, and it's going to end up potentially being either tribal knowledge or internal trivia that could easily go wrong without some level of governance or organization at the end of the day. And I'm not saying that the right thing is for the Salesforce admin to suddenly now be the workflow and agent police. But there has to be some way for companies to start thinking about how they are not going to get stuck into a 2024 version of their company for the rest of their lives, which I could see definitely happening if you over configure and over customize your Salesforce data through 5,000, 10,000, 100,000, a million agents. Maybe the same person builds the same agent 100 different times and never shuts off any of the rest. And at the end of the day, you are just stuck with not knowing which one you're supposed to use when that person leaves after a year.
Well, I call it the Lotus Notes problem. If you're old like me and you remember Lotus Notes, before they got acquired by IBM, I don't think it's even still around anymore. But it was one of the very first
HCL
platforms
has them
where.
now, of all
Oh,
people.
okay, there you go. So, what they were one of the very first platforms that a end user could kind of create their own. In this case, a database, right? It was before automation, and people would we'd wake up and find that they had thousands of these Lotus Notes databases running around, duplicative data, no idea what's on it, no governance, no controls. And in fact, as an analyst, when I've looked at low code platforms, it's always one of the first questions I ask is how do you combat this? And I think that's sort of missing right now in this whole conversation around agentic AI, in how do you provide that governance layer around it. We've talked a lot about governance in the past, but I think that, as always, the hype gets ahead of the reality and the operationalization. As I mentioned, Microsoft also had a press release and a blog post talking about unveiling what they're calling the Microsoft Copilot Studio. Sort of the same, similar idea, slightly different approach, but this idea of building these agents that you can deploy directly into the Microsoft 365 Copilot agents or interface. And again, this idea that from within SharePoint or a business chat, you can go and start creating your own agents. And they even say in there that, I don't have the quote right here, but basically that they envision that there's going to be, thousands of these in an average organization. And again, it was like, wow, I'm just struggling with understanding how that's really the approach we should be going after here.
I'm sorry, but when you said inside SharePoint, I just had an involuntary gasp of,
Right?
it's like everybody has dealt with SharePoint hell and how that has been mismanaged within a company. Like there is no non-messy version of SharePoint in an enterprise at this point.